I just want to say a few quick points about Sweden and Finland joining NATO. I want to point out that a lot of people will say that these are sovereign nations, they get to decide on their own, but we know that that's not true. We know that they will be pressured into joining NATO, and if the government says no, that government will be removed one way or another, just like in Ukraine in 2014. In that case, it was very extreme. It was a violent coup that overthrew that government, and then they will put a client regime into power that will say yes. So they'll just keep doing it until they get the answer that they want to hear. That is not sovereignty. That is coercion. There's also the point that this is being done in this atmosphere of manufactured hysteria. Russia went into Ukraine. It intervened in the middle of an ongoing war that nobody was interested in for the last 8 years. They were going in there. They were going in to stop it. Diplomacy had long since failed. There were 2 Minsk agreements that Kiev failed to uphold. And they continued building up their forces with NATO's help inside of Ukraine, threatening Russian-speaking Ukrainians right on Russia's border, threatening Crimea, which was returned back to Russia by referendum, public referendum, which, by the way, is not happening in Sweden or Finland. There's no public referendum. Somehow this is a sovereign nation making a decision and democracy prevailing, and yet when Crimea held a referendum, that was not. So as you can see, it doesn't matter what's actually happening. It just matters whether it suits the West or not. And if it doesn't, then it's bad. And if it does, it's good, no matter how transparently bad it actually is. Will Finland and Sweden be safer? That's a good question. I hear that a lot. People say, well, of course they will be. Look at Russia. They just invaded Ukraine. Again, they intervened in the middle of an ongoing war. And so they're taking advantage of the fact that people don't understand that, and that there is this irrational fear that the Western media has not only done nothing to address, but they're exploiting this ignorance. Finland and Sweden, not even the people trying to promote their entry into NATO can come up with a plausible threat that either nation faces, except for the ambiguous, made-up threat that Russia is run by madmen and that anyone could be next, including Finland and Sweden, which that is just a blatant lie. It's another WMD lie to advance Western foreign policy objectives. Now, when Finland and Sweden enter NATO, understand this. No, Russia's still not going to invade them. True, they have Article 5, so no one else is going to want to invade them, but nobody wanted to invade either country anyway. But the next time NATO elects to wage a war of aggression anywhere on Earth, say another country like Libya or Afghanistan, they're going to have to send soldiers and treasure to that war, thousands of miles from their own shores, and their soldiers will die and their treasuries will be emptied. How is that making them safer? And now that they're part of NATO, they're going to be partly accountable for things that NATO does. So when they destroyed Libya, and war refugees and migrants would have normally went to Libya to seek a new life and opportunities, when they started flooding into Europe, that was because of NATO. Was that NATO making Europe safer or costing NATO? Of course it's costing NATO. And look what they've done in terms of Ukraine. They've turned it into a war zone. They were militarizing it, knowing full well that it was going to provoke Russia, and they were stoking an ongoing war inside of Ukraine right on Russia's border. I mean, if you're going to say that somehow Finland and Sweden are threatened by what's going on now, how was Russia not threatened by what NATO was doing and encouraging inside of Ukraine? So a lot of things not adding up, but I hope these couple of points here that I pointed out, I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. And I just want to point out one other thing. I want people to take a look at this paper. I've talked about it before. Many other people are talking about it, which is good. This is from the Rand Corporation, Extending Russia. It was published, I believe, in 2019. And what it is a list of things the United States and its allies can do to extend Russia, to tax, to make Russia pay, to wear them out, to destabilize them, to undermine them. Listen to this list of options that they're laying out. And I don't want to spoil it, but every single one of these options, the US and its allies have already executed versus Russia. Hinder petroleum exports. Reduce natural gas exports. Hinder pipeline expansion. We keep hearing about how NATO is all about sovereignty. And yet, remember when Germany was trying to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline with Russia, how the United States just came in and said, no, you're not doing that. If you do that, we're going to put sanctions on your country. We're going to destroy your country's economy. You're not building that pipeline. And so they stopped building the pipeline. Other options were provide lethal aid to Ukraine because they knew that that was a direct threat to Russia. And so they were doing that to threaten Russia because they knew Russia would have to respond because they knew it was a credible threat to Russia. Increase support for Syrian militants so that they could kill Russian soldiers in Syria. When they say Syrian rebels, they're talking about Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is all that was ever on the battlefield in Syria. There was no free Syrian army. Promote regime change in Belarus. That is a direct violation of the UN Charter. That is political interference, and they were actually doing that. In recent years, we remember there were protests in Belarus, and the opposition was openly backed by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. They were underwriting the whole thing and coordinating with its leaders. Reduce Russian influence in Central Asia. Remember just earlier this year, in January, actually, Kazakhstan, US-backed groups were trying to burn that country down. Russia had to intervene there and put a stop to that. Challenge Russian presence in Moldova, and they mean Transnistria. We can see them doing that right now. And they were talking about withdrawing from all sorts of arms control treaties, knowing that it would force Russia to invest heavily in missiles and other weapon systems that would no longer be prohibited, that the US would already be rolling out. So in order to keep up, again, extending Russia to get it to collapse, essentially. And also building up a military presence in Europe. Again, creating a credible threat to Russia that they knew it would have to react to. And for what? What is the reason for doing all of this? It's because the US, for decades, has proclaimed that it will not tolerate a peer or near-peer competitor. Russia and China represent both, and they are doing everything in their power to eliminate them because they refuse to live in a multipolar world with a balance of power between nations. They demand that they hold primacy over all nations. And so that's what this is all about. And Finland and Sweden being coerced into joining NATO, I guarantee you, when they sober up, they are going to have buyer's remorse. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, check the video description below for other places you can find my work, just in case YouTube decides to delete my channel. I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, I'm also on Telegram. In the video description below, I'm going to put a couple of links, reference material that I was looking at before making this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. You can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and through PayPal. And to everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. I could not do this work without that support. And as always, thank you for watching.